The transport shuttle Harmony cut through the darkness of space, its hull gleaming under the distant stars. Inside, twins Hannah and Minho pressed their faces against the viewport, watching as the massive structure of Nexus 7 grew larger with each passing moment. "Look at the size of that thing," Minho whispered, his breath fogging the glass. The space station stretched for miles in every direction, its surface covered in docking bays, weapon platforms, and rotating training modules that sparkled like jewels against the void. Hannah adjusted her black combat uniform, the fabric still stiff and new. "Grandfather always said we'd make it to the stars someday. I just never thought it would be like this." The shuttle's pilot, a gruff human named Captain Reynolds, called back from the cockpit. 10 minutes to docking. Kids, hope you're ready for what's waiting out there. I've been hauling cadets to this place for 5 years, and I've never seen humans step foot on that station." The twins exchanged glances. They knew the weight of what they carried. Earth had fought hard to get them this opportunity. The Galactic Combat Academy only accepted the best warriors from across the galaxy, and humanity had finally proven itself worthy of consideration after decades of diplomatic negotiations. As the shuttle approached the docking bay, massive mechanical arms reached out to guide them in. The bay doors were enormous, easily large enough to accommodate ships 10 times their size. Through the transparent aluminum barriers, they could see other vessels from across the galaxy. Sleek Zephyrian crystal ships that looked like living gemstones, massive Vorthan warships bristling with weapons, and strange organic vessels that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. "Final approach," Captain Reynolds announced. "Remember what they taught you at the Academy back on Earth. Keep your heads up. Don't take any disrespect, but don't go looking for trouble either. You're representing all of humanity now." The docking clamps engaged with a metallic thud that echoed through the shuttle. Hannah felt her heart racing as the airlock cycled through its sequence. This was it. Everything they had trained for, everything their family had sacrificed for, led to this moment. The doors hissed open, and they stepped into another world. The docking bay was a marvel of engineering that took their breath away. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, supported by massive columns that seemed to be made of living metal. Hover platforms carried cargo through the air in perfect choreographed patterns, while maintenance robots scuttled along the walls like mechanical spiders. But it was the cadets that truly captured their attention. Near the main entrance, a group of orphans stood in formation. Each one was easily 7 feet tall, their obsidian skin marked with intricate scars that told stories of battles fought and won. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire, and when they moved, it was with the fluid grace of born predators. To their left, a cluster of Zephyrians floated inches above the ground, their crystalline bodies refracting the station's lights into rainbow patterns. They communicated in musical tones that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and their translucent forms seemed to shift and change as they spoke. The Kathmari were perhaps the most alien of all. Their serpentine bodies coiled and uncoiled. As they moved, their scales shifting colors to match their emotions, some stretched nearly 20 feet long. Their multiple arms allowing them to manipulate tools and weapons with incredible dexterity. And there were others, species the twins had only read about in classified reports. The insectoid Thrax with their compound eyes and razor-sharp mandibles. The gaseous Nebulans who wore containment suits to maintain their form. The cybernetic machina, whose bodies were more machine than organic matter. Every single one of them turned to stare as the twins walked toward the registration hall. The silence was deafening. Hundreds of the galaxy's most elite warriors, creatures who had conquered worlds and toppled empires, all focused onto young humans who had never even left their home system until today. Hannah felt the weight of their gazes but kept her spine straight and her eyes forward. Beside her, Minho matched her pace, his jaw set with determination. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. Well, well, a voice boomed across the bay. Look what crawled out of the outer rim. The speaker was a Vorthan, clearly the leader of his group. His ceremonial scars formed intricate patterns across his arms and chest, marking him as nobility within his warrior culture. His squad of Obsidian Guard trainees moved to flank him. Their movements synchronized like a pack of wolves. Too little. Mammals think they can learn real combat. He continued, his voice dripping with disdain. The translator in the twinsies rendered his words in perfect English, but the contempt needed no translation. Other cadets began to gather, forming a loose circle round the confrontation. The twins could feel the tension building, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Hannah stopped walking and turned to face the Vorthan directly. Her dark eyes remained steady, showing no fear despite being surrounded by beings who could crush her with their bare hands. "We're here to learn, same as everyone else," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the bay. The Vorthan's laugh was like grinding stone. "Learn. Your species barely discovered faster than light travel last century. We've been perfecting combat arts for millennia before your ancestors even discovered fire." Some of the other cadets began to murmur among themselves. The twins could hear fragments of conversation in dozens of languages, most of it questioning why. Humans had been admitted to the academy at all. Minho stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of his sister. His voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "Then teach us, unless you're afraid of what we might learn." The effect was immediate. The Vorthan's glowing eyes flared brighter, and his squad tensed for action. Several other species backed away, recognizing the signs of impending violence. "You dare challenge me, mammal?" The Vorthan snarled. "I am Vextar, son of the war chief of the Obsidian Legion. My family has conquered 17 worlds, and I'm Minho, son of a farmer from Earth." Minho replied without backing down. "Nice to meet you." The bay fell silent. Even the mechanical sounds of the station seemed to fade as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Vextar's face darkened to the color of fresh blood, and his hands moved toward the ceremonial blade at his side. Before violence could erupt, a new voice cut through the tension like a crystal bell. "All cadets report to quarters immediately. Training begins at dawn cycle." The speaker was unlike anything the twins had ever seen. Academy Marshal Quendra stood nearly 10 feet tall, her body composed entirely of living crystal that pulsed. Within a light, she was ancient even by galactic standards, having overseen the Academy for over 3 centuries. Her presence commanded instant respect. Even Vextar stepped back. Though his eyes never left the twins, you heard the Marshal. One of the Thrax cadets clicked, its mandibles translating the words. "Move along." The crowd began to disperse, but slowly. Many cadets continued to stare at the humans, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. As the twins gathered their gear and prepared to follow the others, Vextar leaned close enough that only they could hear him. "Enjoy your stay, humans," he whispered, his breath hot against their faces. "It won't be long." The threat hung in the air like a promise of violence to come. But as the twins walked away, neither of them looked back. They had come too far to be intimidated now. The alarm shrieked through the dormitory at 0500 hours, jerking Hannah awake from restless sleep. 3 weeks had passed since their arrival at Nexus 7, and every single day had been a test of survival. Not just the official training, but the constant sabotage that followed them like a shadow. "Another lovely morning in paradise," Minho muttered, rolling off his nail bunk. His combat suit hung on the wall, still damp from yesterday's malfunction. During the zero-gravity exercises, the life support systems had mysteriously failed. leaving him gasping in the vacuum chamber until the instructors finally noticed. Hannah stretched, working out the kinks in her back. Her own suit bore scorch marks from a training laser that had been accidentally set to lethal settings. They both knew these weren't accidents, but proving it was another matter entirely. The twins made their way to the mess hall, a cavernous space that could feed thousands of cadets from across the galaxy. The air buzzed with dozens of different languages and the clash of alien eating utensils. Vorthans tore into raw meat with their bare hands, while Zephyrians absorbed liquid nutrients through their crystalline skin. At the human section, their meal trays waited. Hannah picked up hers and immediately noticed the slightly green tinge to what should have been protein paste. She sniffed carefully and caught the faint scent of something that definitely wasn't meant for human consumption. Contaminated again, she whispered to Minho. Her brother nodded grimly. Third time this week. Good thing we brought emergency rations. They ate their hidden Earth food bars in silence, watching as other cadets enjoy their meals. The Kevmari delegation slithered past their table, their serpentine bodies moving with liquid grace. One of them, a female named Sithra, paused to look at them with curious golden eyes. "You humans are tougher than you look," she said, her voice carrying the slight hiss common to her species. "Most cadets would have complained about the equipment failures by now." "We're still learning the system," Hannah replied diplomatically. Sithra's scaled face showed what might have been a smile. "Perhaps, or perhaps you know exactly what's happening but choose to handle it quietly. Very wise." After breakfast, they reported to Combat Bay 7 for advanced martial arts training. The space was enormous, with gravity fields that could be adjusted to match the home worlds of different species. Today's session was in Earth normal gravity, which should have given the twins an advantage. Instructor Kethnal, a veteran Thrax warrior with compound eyes that tracked multiple targets simultaneously, called the session to order. "Today, we practice interspecies combat techniques. Adapt or die. As they say in the outer colonies." The pairings were announced, and Hannah found herself facing Sithra. The Kevmari was nearly twice her length when fully extended, with forearms and a tail that could strike with the force of a plasma cannon. Her scales shifted to a deep purple, indicating excitement for the coming battle. "Don't hold back, little human," Sithra said, coiling her lower body for stability. "I want to see what your species can really do." The signal sounded, and Sithra struck immediately. Her tail whipped through the air with blinding speed, indirectly at Hannah's head. Most opponents would have tried to block or dodge backward, but Hannah had been studying Kethmari physiology for weeks. She ducked low and rolled forward, getting inside Sithra's reach. The alien's shoulders had tensed a fraction of a second before the strike, telegraphing the attack to anyone who knew what to look for. As Hannah came up from her roll, she swept her leg across Sithra's supporting coils. The Kethmari's eyes widened in shock as her balance failed. She crashed to the training mat with a sound like falling chains, her tail thrashing helplessly. "Impossible," Sithra hissed, struggling to right herself. "How did you predict my strike pattern?" "I've used that technique for 50 years without it being countered." Hannah extended a hand to help her opponent up. "Your shoulders telegraphed the move. You tense up right before striking. Want me to show you how to mask it?" Round the training bay, other matches had stopped. Cadets from a dozen different species stared at the human who had just defeated one of the Academy's most skilled fighters. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Did you see that?" The human read her like a data file. "How is that possible?" Sithra accepted Hannah's help, her scales shifting to a deep blue that indicated respect. "Your species has been studying us, haven't they? Learning our weaknesses. We learn from everyone." Hannah replied honestly, "That's what humans do. We adapt." Over the following days, word of the twins' victory spread throughout the station. They defeated a Thrax warrior by exploiting blind spots in his compound vision. Minho outmaneuvered a Vorthan by using his smaller size to stay inside the aliens' reach. They worked together to overcome a machiner whose cybernetic enhancements made him nearly invincible in single combat. Each victory brought more attention. Species that had initially ignored the humans now watched their matches with growing interest. The Zephyrians began analyzing their techniques, while the Nebulans floated closer to observe their tactics. But with recognition came increased hostility. From the Obsidian God, Vextares' squad began gathering allies, whispering in dark corners about the mammal problem that needed to be solved. The twins were returning from the library after another frustrating search for their missing study materials when they found their path blocked. The corridor was empty except for maintenance robots that had suddenly shut down, their optical sensors dark. Vextar emerged from the shadows, flanked by 4 of his most trusted warriors. Their obsidian skin seemed to absorb the corridor's light, making them look like living voids in the station's bright interior. "You think you're clever. Mammals," Vextares' voice echoed off the metal walls, "defeating our allies. Showing off your pathetic tricks. But you haven't faced real warriors yet." The twins stood their ground, backs to each other in a defensive formation they'd practiced since childhood. Round them, the Vorthan warriors spread out, cutting off all escape routes. "We're just here to learn," Minho said, his voice steady. "Despite the odds. Learn." Vextar laughed, the sound like grinding stone. "Tomorrow, you face the trial of dominance. 5 of my best warriors against you 2. It's a perfectly legal academy exercise, sanctioned by the instructors." Hannah felt her heart skip a beat. The trial of dominance was an ancient Vorthan tradition, a test of combat prowess that often ended in death or permanent injury. She'd read about it in the restricted files, but never imagined they'd be forced to participate. "And if we refuse?" she asked. Vextares' smile revealed teeth like broken glass. "Refusal is considered an admission of cowardice. You'd be expelled in disgrace. And your species would be banned from the academy forever. Of course, there's also the matter of what might happen to you during the long journey home. Space is dangerous, especially for humans." The threat was clear. Win the trial or face worse consequences later. Minho stepped forward, meeting Vextares' burning gaze without flinching. "We accept." "Good," Vextar put, "because refusing would have been much worse. The trial begins at dawn cycle tomorrow. 5 of my finest against you 2. Try not to die too quickly, mammals. I want the other species to see what happens when inferior beings challenge their betters." As the Vorthans melted back into the shadows, the maintenance robots suddenly reactivated, their sensors glowing as they resumed their duties. The twins were alone again, but the weight of what was coming pressed down on them like a physical force. 5 against 2, Hannah whispered, "and these aren't training matches. They'll be trying to kill us." Minho nodded grimly. "Then we'd better make sure we're ready. We've got one night to prepare for the fight of our lives." In the distance, they could hear the sound of other cadets moving through the corridors, unaware that tomorrow would determine not just the fate of 2 humans, but the future of their entire species in the galactic community. The training bay doors sealed with a heavy thud, leaving the twins alone in the vast space. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the floor, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the station's life support systems and their own breathing. 5 hours until dawn, Minho said, checking his chronometer. 5 hours to prepare for the impossible. Hannah walked to the center of the bay, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, centering herself the way their grandfather had taught them back on Earth. The old man's weathered face appeared in her memory. His voice clear despite the years. "Begin with the basics," she whispered. Dropping into a fighting stance, form follows function, the twins started with traditional taekwondo patterns, their movements synchronized from years of practice together. But as they progressed, they began adapting each technique for their current situation. A high kick became a zero-gravity spiral. A defensive block transformed into a multidirectional counter for opponents with extra limbs. The Vorthans are strong, Minho said, practicing a hip throw against an imaginary opponent. But strength without flexibility is just another weakness. Grandfather always said the oak tree breaks in the storm. But the willow bends and survives, Hannah replied. Flowing from one stance to another, her movements were becoming more fluid, more dance-like as she incorporated lessons learned from watching different alien species move. They worked through Hapkido techniques next. Focusing on joint locks and pressure points, the challenge was adapting these ancient arts to work against beings who might have different anatomical structures. Vorthans had reinforced bone structures and redundant muscle groups, but they still had joints, still had points where force could be applied effectively. Remember Cytherea's surprise when you read her movement, Minho said, demonstrating a wrist. Lock. They're not used to opponents who study them. They expect brute force against brute force. That's their mistake. Hannah nodded. We don't fight their fight. We fight ours. As the night progressed, they began combining techniques in ways that would have made their traditional instructors back on Earth shake their heads in confusion. But this wasn't Earth. And they weren't fighting humans. They were preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of their entire species. The artificial gravity in the training bay could be adjusted, and they spent hours practicing in various settings. Zero-gravity combat was completely different from planetary fighting. There was no ground to brace against, no way to generate power through traditional stances instead. They learned to use momentum and rotation, turning their bodies into spinning weapons that could strike from any angle. Look at this, Minho said, demonstrating a technique he'd developed. He pushed off from the wall, spinning in a tight corkscrew that would let him deliver multiple strikes as he passed an opponent. If they expect me to fight like a ground-bound creature, they're in for a surprise. Han experimented with her own variations, using the three-dimensional nature of zero-gravity to attack from unexpected angles. Her kicks became more like controlled missiles, her entire body a weapon that could change direction mid-flight. The Obsidian Guard trains in formation, she observed, practicing counters against multiple opponents. They're used to working together, supporting each other. But what if we turn that against them? They spent the next hour working on techniques to use one opponent's position against another. A thrown enemy could become a projectile. A redirected attack could strike a different target. In zero gravity, the possibilities were endless. As dawn approached, they heard the first sounds of the station coming to life. Maintenance robots rolled through the corridors, and the distant chatter of alien voices began to echo through the vents. Soon, word would spread that the trial was beginning. They think we're just scared humans, Minho said, stretching muscles that ached from hours of practice. Let them keep thinking that. Grandfather used to tell us about the old masters. Hannah replied, moving through a final series of breathing exercises. They said the best warrior wins before the fight begins, not through strength, but through understanding. By the time the first cadets began gathering in the observation deck, the twins were ready. They had pushed their bodies to the limit, adapted ancient techniques for a futuristic battlefield, and prepared their minds for what was to come. The arena filled quickly. Word had spread throughout the station like wildfire. Zephyrians floated in crystalline clusters, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. Kethmari coiled round the upper viewing platforms, their scales shifting colors with excitement. Thrax warriors clustered together, their compound eyes tracking every movement below. Even the most ancient beings on the station had come to watch. Academy Marshal Quendra materialized in the VIP section, her crystalline form pulsing with interest. Beside her stood Commander Vexon of the Machina Collective, his cybernetic implants glowing with sensor data. "This is unprecedented," Sithra hissed to her companions. "No species has ever been challenged to a trial of dominance so early in their academy career." "The Vorthans are making a statement," replied Zeta, an elderly Thrax who scarred Karapochi spoke of countless battles. "They want to eliminate the human threat before it grows stronger." In the competitors' preparation area, the twins performed their final rituals. They had no fancy armor, no energy weapons, no advanced technology, just their training, their bond as siblings, and the wisdom of ancestors who had fought with nothing but their hands and their will too. "Survive. Remember," Hannah said quietly. "We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every human who dreams of reaching the stars, for a grandfather," Minho added, touching a small photo tucked into his uniform. "For everyone who believed in us." The arena's main doors began to open with a mechanical grinding that seemed to shake the entire station. Through the widening gap, they could see the Obsidian Guard entering in perfect formation. Their black armor gleamed under the arena's lights, and each warrior carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Vexstar led them, his ceremonial warblade crackling with power. Behind him came four of the most elite warriors in the Vorthan military, each one a veteran of dozens of campaigns. Their eyes glowed with the fire of a warrior race that had conquered star systems. 5 against 2, Vexstar called across the arena, his voice amplified by the stadium's speakers, the mammals against the masters of war. "This will be over quickly." The twins stepped forward, side by side, their movements calm and controlled. They wore no armor, carried no weapons, showed no fear to the thousands of watching aliens. They looked impossibly small and vulnerable. "Ready, sister?" Minho asked, his voice barely audible above the crowd's roar. "Always, brother," Hannah replied, settling into a fighting stance that combined elements from half a dozen martial arts. The arena's central platform began to shift, transforming into a zero-gravity combat zone. Artificial gravity fields flickered and died, leaving both teams floating in three-dimensional space. The Obsidian Guard maintained their tight formation, their magnetic boots keeping them oriented in the same direction. The twins, however, began to move in ways that defied conventional military thinking. They spun and twisted, using the lack of gravity to position themselves in impossible angles. They looked less like soldiers and more like dancers, their movements fluid and unpredictable. "Let's finish this," Vexstar growled, raising his warblade. The energy field around the weapon expanded, creating a cutting edge that could slice through starship hull plating. But as the signal sounded to begin the trial, the twins were already moving. Not toward their enemies, but away from them, using the arena's walls to build momentum for an attack that would come from an angle the Vorthans had never considered. The battle for humanity's future was about to begin, and it would be fought not with superior firepower, but with the ancient wisdom of 2 young warriors who refused to accept defeat. The arena's warning klaxon blared 3 times, and then silence fell like a heavy blanket over the massive space. Thousands of alien spectators held their breath as the 2 forces faced each other across the zero-gravity battlefield. Vexstar raised his warblade high, its energy field casting purple shadows across his obsidian armor, for the glory of the Vorthan. Empire, he roared, and his four warriors echoed the battle cry with voices that shook the arena walls. The Obsidian Guard launched themselves forward in perfect formation, their magnetic boots clicking against metal surfaces as they used the arena's structural beams for leverage. Plasma bolts screamed through the air, leaving trails of superheated gas that would have melted ordinary armor. But the twins were no longer where the weapons were aimed. Hannah twisted in midair, her body spinning like a gymnast, as she flowed round the energy blasts. The months of zero-gravity training had transformed her into something that seemed to defy physics. She rolled under a plasma bolt so close it singed her hair, then used the momentum to sweep her leg across the nearest guard's ankles. The massive Vorthan warrior, caught completely off balance, tumbled through the air with a surprised grunt. His plasma rifle spun away from his grasp, and Hannah caught it with practiced ease. Without hesitation, she redirected the weapon toward another attacker, squeezing the trigger just as the alien tried to line up a shot on Minho. The plasma bolt caught the second guard's center mass. Not enough to cause serious injury through his armor, but sufficient to send him spinning helplessly toward the arena wall. He hit with a metallic crush that echoed through the stadium. Impossible, someone shouted from the crowd. She's using their own weapons against them. Meanwhile, Minho had engaged two guards simultaneously, something that should have been suicide against opponents twice his size and strength. But the young human moved like liquid mercury, flowing between their attacks with movements that seemed choreographed. The first guard swung a massive energy mace in a blow that would have crushed a normal human's skull. Minho ducked under it, grabbing the alien's wrist and using Hapkido leverage to redirect the warrior's own momentum. The technique was flawless, turning the Vorthan's strength against him and sending him flying into his partner. Both guards crashed together in a tangle of limbs and armor, their weapons spinning away into the zero-gravity void. But they were far from finished. The larger of the two recovered quickly, pushing off from his companion to launch himself at Minho with claws extended. "You fight like a coward," the guard snarled, his translator crackling with static. "Face me with honor." Minho's response was to grab the alien's outstretched arm and pivot, using the guard's own attack to put him in a submission hold that would have been textbook perfect in any martial arts academy. The Vorthan's roar of pain echoed through the arena as pressure was applied to joints that weren't designed to bend that way. "Yield," Minho said quietly, his voice somehow carrying across the entire stadium despite the chaos. The guard's pride warred with his pain for several seconds before survival instinct won. He tapped out, the universal signal of surrender recognized by every species in the galaxy. The third guard, seeing his companion's defeat, tried to fang Minho while he was distracted. It was a sound tactical move, one that should have worked against any normal opponent. But these weren't normal opponents. Hannah had been tracking the flanking maneuver from the moment it began. As the guard moved to attack her brother, she pushed off from the arena wall with both feet, turning herself into a human missile. Her flying kick caught the alien in the side of his helmet, the impact sending him tumbling end over end. They're working together, Sithra hissed from the observation deck, her scales flashing with excitement. Perfect coordination without any visible communication. The crowd was beginning to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. The supposedly invincible Obsidian Guard, elite warriors who had conquered star systems, were being systematically dismantled by two young humans who moved like they shared a single mind. The fourth guard, realizing his companions were down, made a desperate play. He activated his armor's emergency boosters, rocketing toward Hannah with his energy blade extended. The weapon could cut through starship hull plating, and at this speed, there would be no dodging dot. But Hannah didn't try to dodge. Instead, she waited until the last possible moment. then twisted her body in a move that seemed to defy anatomy. The blade passed so close to her that it cut through her uniform, but she was already moving. Her hand finding the guard's wrist and applying pressure to a nerve cluster she'd memorized from Alien Nanette. Only texts dot the guard's fingers went numb, and his weapon tumbled away. Before he could recover, Hannah had wrapped her legs round his armored torso and applied a chokehold that cut off blood flow to his brain. In seconds, he was unconscious, floating limply in the zero-gravity arena. The crowd's roar was deafening, but it was nothing compared to the sound of Vextares' rage. The Vorthen commander found himself alone, his 4 elite warriors defeated by 2 humans who shouldn't have been able to threaten a single one of them. "This isn't over. Mammals," he screamed, his warblade trembling in his grip. The energy field round the weapon fled brighter, responding to his emotional state. But even as he spoke, Vextar knew the truth. His warriors hadn't been defeated by superior strength or advanced technology. They'd been outfought by opponents who understood combat in ways his proud warrior culture had never considered. The twins regrouped in the center of the arena, their movements still fluid and controlled despite the intensity of the battle. They showed no signs of exhaustion, no indication that they'd just fought 4 of the galaxy's most elite warriors. "Surrender now," Hannah called across the arena, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "You're outnumbered and outmatched." Vextares' laugh was bitter and harsh. "Outnumbered? I am Vextar, son of the war chief. I have led armies across the galaxy. I will not be humbled by inferior mammals," he charged with desperate fury, his warblade cutting through the air in patterns that spoke of decades of training. The attack was textbook perfect, a combination of strikes that should have been impossible to counter. But the twins moved as one, their coordination so perfect it seemed telepathic. Hannah feinted left, drawing Vextares' attention and his blade, while Minho swept right, staying just outside the weapon's energy field. The Vorthen commander realized his mistake too late. His blade was committed to following Hannah's movement, leaving him open to attack from his right side. Minho's strike was precise and controlled, hitting nerve clusters that shut down Vextares' weapon arm. The warblade tumbled away, its energy field dissipating as it spun into the darkness. Vextar himself crashed to the arena floor, his armor systems sparking from the impact. "It is now," Hannah said, floating down to offer him a hand up. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to everything the watching aliens expected, that the arena fell completely silent. Here was the victor, offering aid to the vanquished. It was a concept that many species found difficult to understand. Vextar stared at the offered hand for a long moment, his pride warring with reality. Finally, he reached out and accepted the help, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you defeat us?" "You fought with strength," Minho replied. "We fought with understanding." The arena erupted in cheers from thousands of alien spectators who had just witnessed the impossible. The Ephirians chimed in harmonic patterns. Kethmari hissed their approval, and even the stoic Thrax clicked their mandibles in appreciation. High above in the VIP section, Academy Marshal Quendra S. Crystalline form pulsed with what could only be described as approval. Her ancient voice echoed through the arena's speakers, clear and resonant. "The trial is concluded. The humans have proven themselves worthy of the Academy's highest honors," as the twins floated in the center of the arena, surrounded by the defeated but respectful Obsidian Guard. They knew that everything had changed. They were no longer just 2 young humans trying to prove themselves. They were representatives of a species that had just announced its rival on the galactic stage. The age of humanity among the stars had truly begun. The morning sun of Nexus 7's Artificial day cycles streamed through the massive windows of Combat Training Hall Alpha, casting long shadows across the practice mats. 6 months had passed since the trial of dominance, and the academy had become a completely different place. Hannah stood at the center of the hall, surrounded by cadets from a dozen different species. Towering Vorthons practiced alongside slender Zephyrians, while Kethmari coiled around practice dummies, their movements more fluid than ever before. The sight would have been impossible just half a year ago. Today, we're going to work on adaptive combat, Hannah announced, her voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics. Who can tell me what that means? The young Thrax raised one of his forearms, his compound eyes gleaming with interest. Fighting against opponents who are different from yourself. Instructor Hannah. Close, but not quite complete, she replied, with a smile. Anyone else? Vexstar, now wearing the simple training uniform of a student rather than his ceremonial armor, stood up from where he'd been practicing meditation techniques. The change in him was remarkable. Gone was the arrogant warrior who had challenged the humans on their first day. In his place was a thoughtful student, eager to learn. It's about changing your approach based on what your opponent does, he said, his voice lacking its former contempt. Not just reacting, but understanding why they fight the way they do. Excellent. Hannah nodded approvingly. Combat isn't about being the strongest or having the best weapons. It's about adapting to your opponent and working as a team. She gestured to the observation gallery above, where dozens of instructors and advanced students watched the training session. Among them were former enemies who had become some of their most dedicated pupils. Every species has unique strengths, Minho added, stepping forward to join his sister. The Vorthons have incredible physical power. The Zephyrians can analyze multiple combat scenarios simultaneously. The Kethmari have unmatched flexibility and reach. But none of us are complete fighters alone, Hannah continued. The key is learning from each other, combining our strengths to cover our weaknesses. To demonstrate, she called forward 3 volunteers, a Vorthon, a Zephyrian, and a Kethmari. Traditional combat doctrine says these 3 should fight in separate units, each using their species' preferred tactics. But what if we try something different? What followed was a demonstration that left the entire hall silent with amazement. The 3 aliens moved together like parts of a single organism. The Vorthon provided the raw power. The Zephyrian analyzed threats and coordinated attacks, and the Kethmari used their flexibility to strike from impossible angles. This is what we call integrated combat, Minho explained as the demonstration concluded. Not just fighting alongside each other, but truly fighting as one. A young human cadet, one of the first to arrive after the academy opened its doors to Earth, raised her hand nervously. Instructor Minho, how do we learn to work with beings who are so different from us? Vexstar answered before either twin could speak. You start by forgetting everything you think you know about superiority, he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. I spent years believing Vorthons were the ultimate warriors. It took 2 humans to show me how wrong I was. He turned to address the entire class. Instructor Hannah, how do we develop this adaptability? How do we learn to see beyond our own limitations? Hannah's smile was warm and encouraging. Practice, discipline, and never stop learning. That's the human way. But it doesn't have to be only the human way. The training session continued for another 2 hours, with species that had been enemies for centuries learning to work together as partners. The breakthrough came when a mixed team of humans, Vorthons, and Thrax successfully completed a combat scenario that had been designed to be impossible for any single species. Did you see that? Whispered Commander Vexon to Academy Marshal Quendler as they watched from the VIP observation deck. They're not just learning human techniques, They're creating something entirely new. The ancient Zephyrians' crystalline form pulsed with thoughtful light. The humans have given us something we never expected, she replied. They've shown us that our differences can be strengths rather than weaknesses. News of the revolutionary training methods spread throughout the galaxy faster than hyperspace communications could carry it. Military academies on hundreds of worlds began requesting human instructors. The Galactic Defense Council, which had previously viewed humanity as a minor player in interstellar politics, suddenly found themselves dealing with requests for human military advisors from their most powerful member species. The transformation wasn't limited to combat training. Human ideas about cooperation and adaptation began influencing everything from space exploration to diplomatic negotiations. The rigid hierarchy that had dominated galactic civilization for millennia began to give way to more flexible, collaborative approaches. In the Academy's administrative offices, holographic displays showed the incredible statistics. Combat effectiveness had increased by 400% among mixed species units. Injury rates during training had dropped to historic lows. Most importantly, the number of interspecies conflicts had decreased dramatically as former enemies learned to work together. It's remarkable, Admiral Coughlin of the Vorthan Imperial Fleet admitted during a visit to the Academy. Our military doctrine has remained unchanged for 3,000 years. These humans have revolutionized it in 6 months. The Terran Combat Corps was officially established on the 6-month anniversary of the Trilove dominance. Hannah and Minho were promoted to the rank of commanders, making them the youngest species representatives in galactic military history. The ceremony was held in the main arena where they had first proven themselves. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy attended, including ambassadors, military leaders, and former students who had returned to spread the new combat philosophy to their home worlds. We didn't come here to change the galaxy, Hannah said in her acceptance speech. We came here to learn. But sometimes the act of learning changes everything round you. As the ceremony concluded, the twins found themselves on the observation deck of the Academy, watching as new transport shuttles arrived with fresh cadets. Among them were more humans, but also beings from species that had never before been accepted into the Academy. Look at that, Minho said, pointing to a group of young Nebulans floating in their containment suits. A year ago, they were considered too fragile for combat training. Now they're some of our best strategic thinkers, Hannah replied. Who would have thought that beings made of gas could teach us about fluid dynamics in zero gravity? A soft chime indicated an incoming message. The holographic display showed their grandfather's weathered face, transmitted from a via quantum entanglement communicator. I saw the ceremony on the news feeds, the old man said, his eyes bright with pride. Your grandmother would have been so proud of her grandchildren. Commanders in the galactic military, we learned everything from you, grandfather, Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion, the forms, the philosophy, the importance of never giving up. I taught you to fight. He replied with a gentle smile, but you taught the galaxy to fight. Together, that's something far greater than anything one old man could have imagined. As the transmission ended, the twins stood in comfortable silence, watching their students practice in the training bays below. Humans worked alongside Vorthans. Zephyrians collaborated with Kethmari, and former enemies had become closest friends. Grandfather would be proud, Minho said softly. He always said we were destined for great things, Hannah replied. I just don't think he imagined it would be among the stars. The Academy's evening cycle was beginning, and the artificial lights dimmed to simulate sunset. But the training continued, as it always did. Species that had spent millennia in isolation were learning that they were stronger together than apart. The twins watched as their students, human and alien alike, trained together, learning that true strength came not from individual prowess, but from unity, adaptation, and the courage to face any challenge. The age of human expansion had begun, and it started with two fearless fighters who refused to back down. But more than that, it had become something greater, the age of galactic cooperation, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, and where the strongest armies were built not from a single species, but from the combined strengths of all. In the distance, transport ships prepared for departure, carrying newly trained officers back to their home worlds. They would take with them not just combat techniques, but a new way of thinking about cooperation and strength. The galaxy would never be the same, and it all started with two young humans who believed that everyone had something to teach and something to learn. The end.